What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, I wanted to tackle the stronghold that overly academic language has in our profession as a whole. And instead, I'd like to emphasize the use of plain speak, or as I like to call it, talking like a normal person in all of our interactions, including our professional and, yes, academic interactions. I'm not saying that we need to dumb ourselves down, make ourselves seem less smart than we are, but when we are trying to communicate with people, it's much more effective if we speak in the same terms that are most broadly understood while still being clear and accurate, articulate, educated, etc. And if you're like me and you caught the bad habit of using overly academic language, I'm going to offer some tips at the end of this episode to help you overcome that habit. Plain speak can mean different things in different contexts. In some contexts, people use it to mean to speak frankly what's on your mind without filtering it, without trying to be polite or PC or that sort of thing. I'm not necessarily referring to that because that can start to trend towards being less professional. I'm talking more about removing the overly academic language from your interactions, whether it's with clients, how you write about yourself online, your interactions with fellow therapists, yes, even if you are a professor, to talk more using the language that people tend to use in their day-to-day interactions. We want to eliminate that use of those giant words, just those giant words that make you sound really smart but make it really difficult for people to understand what you're saying. To me, Academese takes me back to those days in high school, middle school, where I thought, my book report doesn't sound very smart. How do I make this better? I know, I'm going to look up these words in the thesaurus and I'm just going to put big words in instead of the regular words that I had in there, and then my book report is going to sound smarter. I think Michael Scott from The Office is an excellent humorous example of this idea of reaching for big words in order to sound smart, except comically Michael Scott always mixes up his words and shows that he doesn't really know what he's talking about when he's using these bigger words.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
That is sort of an oaky afterbirth.
What was that?
Let's dive into the official reasons why I think it's important to lean into plain speak, even in all of our professional interactions as a therapist. And these reasons are in no particular order, I just wrote them down. Reason number one, it helps build trust with potential clients and existing clients, and potential referral sources, actually with kind of everyone. Overuse of academic language does not equate to untrustworthiness. However, overuse of academic language can make it more difficult for somebody to build trust with you. If we were to imagine I was a potential client looking for a therapist and I'm reading therapist profiles online, if I found a therapist profile that was using overly academic language, rather than seeing all that terminology and thinking, oh good, I found the place for me to land, this is the person that's going to help me, instead it might sort of feel like I see all this jargon that I potentially don't understand, and I don't really know how this person is going to help me. I don't know if they see me and my problems because I just see this jargon. The next reason why I think it's worth steering away from overly academic language is in order to lean into authenticity. If it's very authentic for you to use very academic language, that's just how language flows out of your mouth across the board, then that is you. I actually think you're a good candidate to keep being that way. But I think a lot of times people who use overly academic language in their professional lives are not also using overly academic language in their personal lives. Not only do I think it's much more beneficial to our clients for us to be as authentic as we can while remaining professional, but I also think it's supportive to our well-being as therapists, where if we feel like we're sort of living a double life, I have it together with my clients, but then over here at home in the rest of my life, I'm falling apart, I don't have it together, I think that wears on us over time. So if there's any ways we can appropriately lean into authenticity as a therapist, I think that's also going to benefit our own well-being as well. And on a very practical note, using plain speak instead of academic language can be really helpful from a marketing perspective when it comes to SEO. We're not going to break down SEO today. If that's the first time you've heard that acronym, I will link to some videos I've made before about it. But basically, you want potential clients to find you when they are doing a Google search or a now Search GPT or a voice search through Alexa or whatever, looking for a therapist. They're going to use plain speak because that's how people talk. So if you're speaking in plain speak on your marketing materials, then it's much more likely that those words will line up with what folks are looking for when they're looking for a therapist. And a major reason that I'd like to kind of harp on in this episode, and I kind of alluded to it already, is using overly academic language can be ostracizing. I think it's especially common in career paths that require a significant amount of academic training to get onto the path that we're on, for folks to confuse academic language with professionalism. And to me, those two things live on completely separate planes. To me, professionalism is about being responsible, keeping healthy boundaries, and staying focused on prioritizing what's in your client's best interest. What words you're using to do that has little to nothing to do with how you accomplish those goals. And if anything, in my opinion, overuse of academic language can start to ostracize clients. Ostracize anyone for that matter. I mean, I've been emphasizing building trust with our clients and potential clients, but even from therapist to therapist, supervisor to supervisee, professor to student, we can start to ostracize the people that we are speaking to simply by demonstrating that there are words we know that they may not know. And in a lot of these contexts, we are in positions of teaching, training, coaching, mentoring, whatever it might be. And those are scenarios where it's super important for us to use language that makes sense for the people that we're talking to. Okay, so now that I've made a case for why I think it's a good idea to minimize overly academic language in our professional lives, now we're going to get into some tips on how to make that pivot. The first tip I think is useful on so many practical levels, not just reducing your use of academic language, but just improving your communication skills overall. And that tip is to practice listening to yourself. Whatever marketing materials you have out there about yourself, whether it's an online profile, website, or even if it's an email that you're sending out to potential referral sources, things like that, go ahead and read that text out loud to yourself, pull out your phone and record a voice memo of it, and then listen to it back and think, does that sound like me? Is that what I sound like? Some of us may listen back and say like, oh yeah, that's not what I usually sound like. And other times it might be a little less clear. So that brings us to my next tip to help you reduce your use of academic language. And that's to bring in a friend. Specifically this time, I would suggest a non-therapist friend. If it's a loved one who knows you quite well, like a partner, all the better. But basically have them listen back to that voice memo that you just created and say like, does that sound like me? Is that what I normally sound like? And they will tell you, they will know. And you know what? If your friend or loved one points out that that just doesn't quite sound like you, no need to be offended. It's very, very common. This is why I'm making this episode. Just take it in stride. Say, okay, it's happened to me too, just like everybody else. And now what to do to bring it back to earth. How do I make this sound more like me? How do I make this sound more like plain speak? And you can kind of make this a little challenge for yourself. Like once they sort of flag a few spots that were confusing to them, see if you can work on that wording a bit, and then try presenting it to a different non-therapist friend and kind of iron out the edges, see what sorts of snags are coming up that people get confused by. And kind of on the same vein, I really like this subreddit, Explain Like I'm 5. Now, you don't have to actually speak like someone is a 5-year-old, but we do want to keep in mind that the average reading level in the US is a 7th or 8th grade reading level. So I think there's wisdom in making all your marketing materials be at about a 5th grade reading level, because again, that's going to make what you put out there more accessible to more people. And fortunately now with AI, there's a lot of tools that can help you understand what reading level your writing is at and can even modify it for you to be at the appropriate reading level. I'll link to one here called CoGrader.com. Just as an example, I made up this sentence that I thought sounded like it was above a 5th grade reading level. It says, "I'd like assistance converting the notion of psychological interventions into a legible, accessible format for all Homo sapiens to comprehend." Okay, I was kind of being cheeky there, but sometimes it feels like that. So then in the next space, it says, "Specify the grade level it should be tailored for," and I'm just going to put 5 for grade 5 and submit. Would you look at that? It says, "I need help explaining psychological interventions so that everyone can understand them easily." That's one sentence, and that was already quite useful, but you could take like your entire About Me section of your website, your entire Psychology Today profile, pop it in a tool like this one, ask it to make it a 5th grade reading level, and see what it spits out. If you look at that AI generated content that shows you the 5th grade level version of what you wrote, you can see what modifications it made to your language and then kind of bring it back in. Make those changes yourself, but in your own words, make it sound like you, and let that be your online marketing content. Well, I think that's kind of what I wanted to cover today. I hope you don't mind me going on a little bit of a ranty type of content creation here. I want to repeat something I said along the way, that stepping away from academic language doesn't mean that we need to step away from professionalism. I think we can learn over time that professionalism has little or nothing to do with how big of words we're using. It has everything to do with the kind of person that we are, how we live out our lives, and if we use smaller words than average, we can still be super professional. On that note, I think this is where we leave off today. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring today's video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, thank you again for joining me in this episode. This just felt like it was on my mind and I wanted to say it. I hope it was helpful for some of you. Until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.